Thank you, Marjorie, for the introduction. I have the pleasure of leading an initiative here at Ascend, focused on the 1 in 5 students enrolled in post-secondary pathways who are parents. Student parents are a powerful population. They are fighting for a better future for themselves and their families through education, and it's important that our system support them in this endeavor. While preparing this introduction, I heard an NPR story about a single mother in New York City who was losing part of her monthly SNAP benefits because of the looming end of the federal COVID public health emergency declaration. In her story, she shared that she didn't have more time or more hours to commit to work due to childcare, and that she's in school too. So she was in school trying to better herself, and that's partly why, with childcare and work, she was in school that she wasn't able to commit more hours to work. I heard that declaration and I was immediately reminded why I'm here today as an advocate and the son of a student parent. Ascend's Post-Secondary Success for Parents initiative launched our third phase in 2022, and we've been busy engaging with key stakeholders, some featured in today's session. We now have 35, and you met two of them, of our PSP parent advisors, sharing their lived experience to better our efforts. You heard from Christian, you heard from Jessica, Drayton, Janine, as well as Tamika. So excited about that. We have partnered with 6 public entities to reform their public benefits to promote parents enrolling and completing post-secondary credentials. I give a shout out to Georgia DeKalb. I see Commissioner Amy Jacobs is here, along with several others. We have provided technical assistance to over 30 colleges to create or expand supports for parents, with a recent emphasis on those serving Black and Native students. And we've recently launched the second season of our 1 in 5 podcast, featuring the voices of current and former student parents, such as Ascend Fellow Daria Willis, who you'll hear from very shortly. With that, I'd like to introduce a champion for student parents and a leading voice around racial and gender justice, our moderator, Chastity Lord. Chastity is the president and CEO of Jeremiah Program. Jeremiah is a national organization with a mission to disrupt the cycle of poverty for single mothers and their children through a holistic model, providing residential and non-residential programming to families pursuing education. Welcome Chastity and our panelists to the forum stage.
Thank you, David. Good morning. Come on, I know it's there's a lot going on, but good morning.
Good morning.
So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to have a conversation. Ultimately, we're in my kitchen right now, and we're having a cup of coffee with some incredible humans here on my stage with me right now. We have the president of Howard Community College, Dr. Daria Willis, known as Dr. Willis. We met Jessica earlier, but we have Jessica Pelton. She likes to go by Jess. And we have Assistant Secretary, Mr. Nasser. Good morning. And so we are really going to be in conversation with each other as much as possible in my kitchen. And yeah, there are about 1,500 folks listening in. But then we're going to create a space for you to ask questions and to be in conversation with us. The goal of this session is, in a lot of ways, is anchored in what we believe at Jeremiah Program. You know, at Jeremiah Program, we understand, we wake up thinking about single moms living at the financial margins with small children in pursuit of economic mobility. And similar to my mom, most of our moms are told to put their head down and bet on their kids. But we lose a generation when we do that. And what we do is that, like most moms, JP moms, single moms living at the financial margins are great moms. And they're looking for an opportunity to pick their heads up, bet on themselves and bet on their children. And we curate a world that allows them to bring all of their identities to the table. And so this morning, we're going to talk about that. We're going to do a little truth telling. We're going to talk about the fact that you can't talk about generational poverty in this country, generational poverty, without talking about the role of race and the role of gender. We're going to talk about how we have really limited the conversation around economic mobility to sprinting instead of the marathon. And so what better people to have in the conversation than the folks that are on the stage with us right now. And so the first question I'm going to pose to Jess. And Jess, I'm going to anchor it around in one of my favorite authors is this woman named Audre Lorde. We're not related. She has an E on her name. But in Sister Outsider, Transforming Silence, she talks about it's not our differences that separate us, it's our silence. And one of the things I love about the story you told earlier and your time at Michigan is that you used your voice. Could you talk about how your current role at Michigan, how the fact that you were student parent and that you used your voice influences how you actually support students? And ultimately, the lens is the value proposition of not just being proximate, but being vocal, and I might say loud.
Yeah, so a lot of it started when I was a student myself and was a parent and realized how different I was on my campus. I didn't meet any other student parents except for my husband, who was a student parent, but he was doing an internship while I was on campus.
Was he your husband when you did you guys meet at school?
No.
Okay, so he was a student parent too. Okay, got
Yeah,
it. I thought
yeah.
I had a love story. I was ready for it. Modern love. I was ready for it. Okay,
I mean,
continue on, Jess. I have to let it
we
go.
met at 18,
Yeah.
got pregnant at 19, and he wanted to go to college for my
Okay.
daughter, and then he really pushed me to go to college for our daughter. And I didn't think it was possible. She had been diagnosed with a brain tumor and had hydrocephalus, and by the time I finally said, "Let's go," she was scheduled for brain surgery. So I never thought I could even go. I was worried about who was going to take care of her. I had advisors tell me not to go, but I decided because of all that, I was going and I wanted to go for her. I wanted to show her just how possible it was. But when I got to the University of Michigan, I realized it was so hard to not only be a student parent, but be a student parent to a kid with health issues. She was 6 years old, so she didn't fit the criteria for the childcare subsidy or the childcare centers. So I didn't have those resources that were on my campus because she was older, because she had health issues. Her doctors told us not to send her to daycare. So when the pandemic hit is when it really sank in. She was online, I was online. I loved online college. It was the best fit for me. So
How
it
old
is
was she when she was online? What grade?
she would have been starting second grade.
Okay, I had one of those that was like that was comedy. Yeah.
Oh,
That was comedy. Remember that? That
uh,
was comedy. Okay.
it was hard,
Yeah.
and, like, in her school pushed us to do this
Yeah.
online program where they
Yep.
gave no support.
Yep.
It was literally the parents fend for
Yep.
themselves.
Yep.
It was the worst program.
Yep.
Her school was terrible for
It was
doing
worse
it.
everywhere. Don't worry. You
Yeah,
weren't alone.
and then to, like, for her to be online and try to teach her online and me to do online, I'd be in my classes and I'm looking over at her and she's hanging upside down on the couch.
Yep.
And I'm like, "Are you even listening?" And, she's
They're like, hit
well,
the blue button, go in the
yeah.
break room. You're like, really? You think they're going to be a bit?
She's like, "It's boring." So I wanted to do hire a tutor, but I was a student, and so
Yeah.
tried to contact the childcare subsidy and wanted to get funding for a tutor, and they were like, "We don't fit those needs."
Mhm.
And it's we've never heard of a student like you. We didn't know you existed on this campus. We thought we were traditional.
Oh.
And so it's like, okay, so if you're telling me I'm the only one, you're sitting here telling me to my face I'm the only student like this, then make an exception.
Mhm.
Why are there not exceptions to the rules to students like me if you're saying they don't exist? If you're saying I'm the only one, then you're making an exception for one person. Like, it ain't gonna hurt your budget. Or like, it's the funders don't fund it for that way. Well, did you tell them we exist? Did you tell them that like a student like me can't use this whole 8 to 5 program or in a facility where it risks her health? She had a history of the PICU. It wasn't something I was trying to do. And it's, well, no, because we didn't know. And so, okay, so go to those funders, tell them those stories, get the funding to support these programs that will actually help all student parents. Like, if we're talking about equity, then why aren't we covering these rare cases of students that don't exist on our campus? Like, make those exceptions. So that's where it really started, was all of that. And I just wanted even an ounce of the resources that student parents actually had on my campus. Like, we had some, and yet I couldn't access any of them. And so that's where it started. And then it really grew. I realized advocating for myself was advocating for this whole population of students. And then it just grew and grew. And I was actually able to create a study space on our campus with the support of the library and another unit on our campus. And even that gave me such a space because I could bring my daughter to campus and study without people staring at me. Because it was so hard to study on a campus where everyone just watched you or wanted to talk to your daughter like she's this like prized token. Like, great, but I'm trying to study and I'm a student. So even like creating a space like that really opened up all new doors for me and for a lot of other students where we could go, we could bring our kids, they could be crazy and loud, and it was allowed. it had passcodes so like other students couldn't abuse it. And so that's where the work started, and it's grown now into being able to advocate on a much bigger area or realm, I guess. And I just think it's so important to have a student parent in the work because, like, as much as the stakeholders are a great support, if you weren't a student parent, you don't know my story. You don't know what I lived through. You don't know the struggle. Like, you can sympathize 100%, but you don't know the actual struggle. So I find it so important to have that student parent in the mix. If you create a coordinator on your campus, make it be a student parent or someone that was a student parent. Like, if it's just some regular staff member, all you're going to get is sympathy. You're not going to get the knowledge, the experience, the real life of it.
I love that. I love that. All the things, Jess. There's a couple of things I just, in the spirit of just, speaking truth to power, you weren't asking them to make an exception. What you're asking them to is honor their commitment to students, and you too were a student. You weren't asking them for something outside of the ordinary. You were just asking them to reimagine definitions of what students look like, feel like, sound like, and engage with. But I want you to hold that it's not just giving voice just for you and your daughter. You have actually shifted for a generation of everyone that enters into that campus. It's legacy building stuff that you did. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes. So, Dr. Willis, I was
Yes,
listening. Yes, ma'am. So, one of the things that I love, I think you're the fifth president at Howard Community College. But one of the things I was listening recently is the 1 in 5 podcast. And so, Sin has a podcast. If you don't, you should completely check it out. And Dr. Willis was on there, and she was talking about being a student parent herself. And it wasn't lost on me the importance of having folks proximate to the mic, not just to advocate for student parents, but to also set vision, set strategy, and to lead. I'd love for you to talk about how your experience as a student parent is influencing how you're leading at your college.
Thank you for that. And Jess, amazing job. Like, amazing work, speaking up, speaking out. And I mean, it's just, your story is very similar to mine. I remember the days walking around Tallahassee, Florida, pregnant, big belly. Hot. Dear God, it was hot. Y'all think global warming's an issue now. When I was pregnant in Tallahassee, walking around, it was hot all the time. But I was really big, but I was invisible. And back to what you were saying, Jess, it's like our institutions don't want to acknowledge that we exist. And I say we because I'm in that paradigm as well. And I also think that we need professionals and presidents and VPs and all the administrative staff who have had the lived experiences that our students are living so that we can put the resources behind it and not just say this is what's up on our mission, vision, values, and goals for our institutions. So when I come into the work, I honestly didn't think that this would be my mantra or my calling. Like, I always said I wanted to be a president. Yeah, I'm gonna do this thing. But it wasn't until I went to Capitol Hill one day and they asked me to speak about my experiences as a student parent that I thought, aha, that's what it is, right? So it's all about really supporting the students. And what they said yesterday, one of the students said, meet them where they are, don't say that. And that really struck a chord with me because in higher ed, we hear that all the time. Meet students where they are. There's a whole book that's published on that. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting concept. Meet them where they dream to be, right? Help them get there. Because I had dreams. I knew what I wanted to do. But it was as if I sat in a room and I had a scarlet letter, as if nobody in that room ever had sex before.
Okay, we're going.
Right?
Good morning.
Good morning. And this is the way I talk to my staff. So I'm gonna let you know now, right? I remember one day at my last institution when we were talking about student parents and they were like, well, why would we do that? And I went, so how many of y'all had sex before? And the whole room fell silent. Okay, how did you get here? Immaculate conception? I mean, help me understand, make it make sense, right? The other day I said, make sure we put some condoms out there and don't put them in the brown paper bag, just throw them out. We need to normalize these conversations on our campuses so that it's not this hidden thing. We need to recognize that our student parents are there and that they have struggles and that they have needs, and we need to be able to support them in that. And it's not the exception to the rule. If you look at a lot of different institutions will say, we're here for the student. We're here, but you can't be here for the student if you don't even recognize that they exist. And then when you recognize it, do something about it. I'll tell you a quick story. So we just opened up a student parent study space in our library. Yay, it was awesome. But let me tell y'all, that was a 9-month process. I felt like I had birthed a whole nother baby to get it, because we are so stuck in tradition. We are, and especially in higher education. And I hate it because we are stuck in the traditional world of, when I was in college in the 1960s, I could major and do whatever I wanted to do. So I went to my folks and I said, this is what we need. And the librarians pushed back and said, but you can't have student parents or babies in the library. And I said, why not? Well, because they're loud. Okay. Why not? Well, because we can't have food in the library. Well, don't people get hungry? I said, which one of y'all don't have a stomach? Well, they have the cafe for that. I said, okay, I want you to build a study space for our student parents so that they can have a place to go. Because what I was hearing was students who had children couldn't study at home because the commute from where we are in Columbia to wherever they live takes 3 hours to go 5 miles on the bus route. So we can talk about that later, right? So why don't we build a space on campus where we can have all the little babies with their germs and everything else, right? The diapers, the Cheerios, or whatever they need in a space that's made for them by them. Y'all, it took me 9 months. Then they wrote this whole little ground rules of what this room is going to be. They did. And they sent it up to the president's team, and it said things like, don't do this, don't do that. I mean, every
Anchoring in the
sentence,
deficit.
yes, started with don't. And I ripped up the paper and said, nope, take it back, do something else with it. We're not going to start with a deficit mindset. And I said, I joke with the team now, and I say, so can I have Cheerios in the room? Can I have a snotty nose if I want to? Can I be loud if I want to be? Because we need to rethink these spaces and get out of tradition. So when I think about my experience, I often think about the times that I was literally invisible on a college campus with a humongous belly, in Tallahassee, Florida. And then when I had my kid walking around campus, you're lucky they actually spoke to yours. They didn't touch mine. But it was only a few people in certain spaces that I could go and shove my kid into the office and say, can you watch her while I go to my class from 6 to 9 p.m.? Because I didn't qualify for the Child Care Learning Center. And then one last point, and I'm gonna shut up. The conversation yesterday about free college is so true. So I got scholarships and fellowships to go to college. I didn't have to pay tuition. But guess what my student loans are for? And I'm a president and I'm still paying back my student loans. And I'm saying that because we have a wonderful
Okay.
federal person that's sitting here. So I'm going to go ahead and say it. Yes, because no one thought about the wraparound support that I needed. The food, the housing, the cost of childcare. That's what I took my student loans out for. It wasn't for textbooks. It wasn't for my tuition. All of that was covered. So my fear is if we keep talking about free college, we're going to forget that life happens. And even if you offer that free, quote unquote, free tuition, which ain't free, it comes on the back of somebody at some point, then our students will not be successful. So recognize that our student parents are there, and then put them in the spaces and let them tell you what they need to provide the supports that are necessary for them.
I love that. All of that. All of that. A college president who's able to hold identities of so many people on that campus and able to not just advocate for them, but to be a proof point in so many ways. It's not magical regarding dreams that you can actualize. There's something you're saying, Dr. Willis, around ordinary. And I want to push on this is that I believe it was Gloria Steinem who said the majority in this country owns the noun and leaves the rest of us with adjectives. The majority in this country owns the noun and leaves the rest of us with adjectives. Female CEO, Black literature, gay marriage, student parents. And I think in some ways we have to recapture the noun for ourselves and honor that parents students is a continuum. There's a lot in that definition. And I challenge you to be more inclusive of what that noun means in that way. Obviously, we're in 2023. We all know what that means. And we have to do what we have to do to be able to illuminate and enlist people in where we currently are. But I have a dream. There you go. I have a dream where we actually are able to state student and people think about parents as well. And so, no, you're on the hot seat. You're going to solve all of our problems here, Assistant Secretary Nasser. So, the Assistant Secretary, one of the things I would love for you to talk about, this is an opportunity to talk about some of the things that are happening in the Biden-Harris administration. We have a lot of folks in this room who care deeply about this topic, and they understand that about 68% of student parents live at or below the poverty line. They understand that disproportionately Black, Latinx, Latino, Indigenous are less likely to even graduate. But we'd love to hear some of the things that the administration is doing around student parents. And you were working on an initiative around childcare means for parents, and kind of what's the update on that as well. And if you could throw in there just, a want to solve all the problems, that would be great too.
Do you want the meaning of life added at the minus?
We may not have time for that, but we can kind of write it, maybe
All
we
right.
can,
Well,
vocally.
First of all, good morning.
Good morning.
I think you did better when Chastity asked you the second time for good morning. You have the energy I see in your eyes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much. Just thank you for being such a role model for so many people. And what a great story that you shared with us there. I'm delighted to be here to talk about the commitment of the administration in increasing education attainment in this country, especially for people who've been left behind, people of color. But before that, I should also mention that I started at the department a few months ago. For 37 years, I was an academician. I have been chancellor of several universities. The last one was Indiana University in Indianapolis with 30,000 students. I was there for about 7 years as the chancellor of that campus. So I have seen the situation and the issue that we are talking about here. I have seen how students are struggling. I have seen how people have been left behind. So in my experience, there are like 3, 4 challenges we need to overcome. Number one, we need more just like people that are determined to go to college. People, we are all parents want the best for their kids, and they sacrifice everything for that kid. Sometimes they sacrifice themselves for that kid. On the plane, when there is an emergency, they say, put your mask on yourself first, then on the child. If you just focus on that child and forget about yourself, give up quickly, that child will have difficulty later on. So, this is one challenge to get people motivated, wanting to go. But then there are other challenges. We need to get institutions and universities to make it simpler for people to maneuver there. Universities have become very complex. 37 years in a university, I have difficulty knowing exactly what office does what where. So for that reason, where I was, we created a degree completion office, an office for older adults, office one-stop shop for people so that they don't need to go 10 places and go. So that's a second challenge. Institutions need to find ways of making it easier for people to go there. Students will be successful if they feel comfortable on that campus. If you don't feel if you don't feel like you don't belong there, how can you go and study? So that's another thing. Create a campus friendly. But money has a lot to do with it too, right? Money has a lot to do with education, and that comes from different places. Need-based aid by institutions is extremely important. Merit-based is wonderful, but need-based aid is very important. Now, this administration is committed in supporting students to get that degree, especially people of color who've left behind. Uh, in the last recession that we had, big recession in 2009-ish, so people lose jobs, they get it afterwards. People with baccalaureate degrees, they lost jobs. Employment actually increased by 2 more million 2 years later. People lost jobs, got jobs. People with high school diploma, about 6 million of them lost jobs before that recession. How many of them got back? 6 million stayed where they were. They didn't get the jobs back. This is the power of education. This is what we need to do. So you mentioned when I joined, by the way, the federal government, I noticed that there are lots of acronyms being used. So I learned that now. I'm sorry, I only know acronyms, but C campus. That's what you were talking about. Child care assistant means
Parents
parents
in
in school
program.
program. C campus. C campus is a
Yeah.
is a form of funds for institutions to create child care centers for parents. Parents feel more comfortable if child is with them in the same institution and safe. So this year we have $75 million that we are distributing. Uh, Next year the administration is asking 20 more million for that, 95 million. So that's one way of supporting students that need that support, childcare that we need. The other thing is, when I went to college in the 70s, you could get a Pell Grant and work a little bit and be able to pay your tuition. In this period of 30, 40 years, tuition has increased significantly, significantly. Pell Grant has stayed constant in this period. Thanks to this administration, last year we increased it by 500. This year we are increasing it by $900. We are requesting another 820 for next year, on the way of doubling Pell Grant by the year 2029. I think that deserves a hand. So those are some of the supports that the administration is putting out there. There are a number of other areas that we are supporting. We did talk about free community college or free college. That doesn't solve all problem, but solves part of the problem. I think that the a seamless, affordable education of community colleges in 4 years is the best way for people to go through college. And not everyone needs to get a PhD, right? A certificate, a 2-year program, something that gives them a leg up, or a program. So that's one of the things that we are pushing, and we are asking states to consider increasing funding for community colleges, because they are closer to people, they're everywhere, and they could provide, and they are less expensive, and they're easier to maneuver. That's ideal for people. So a number of other areas that the administration is working to try to make it easier for people. But the culture of institutions need to change. They need to appreciate and understand the issues that parents have, people of color have. And that is something that when you go on a diet, you can't just one day pay attention to it in a month and 29 days not pay attention to it. It won't work, whatever that is. When you
Are you
talk
picking
about,
on me?
I'm sorry?
Are you picking on me?
No, I'm making a general statement. But the thing is this, talking about importance of diversity on a campus, in a state of the campus address, in an annual report, in a report to the government is not sufficient. You've got to be committed to it every day at each institution. You've got to make all of your deans and faculty really appreciate the importance of it, and set policies against issues that is stopping people there. So those are some of the things that we work with institutions to make sure that that happens there. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
No,
with
thank you. And I want to make sure this point doesn't get lost too. We're talking about folks with lived experience being proximate to the mic, being able to influence strategy policies that really influence and create spaces for folks to matriculate, persist, and graduate, especially student parents. And I want to echo and celebrate the Biden and Harris administration for having a practitioner sitting in the post-secondary office to be able to influence and to be able to build policy and strategy, because I think that matters when you are able to grapple with and give voice to what is really happening on college campuses. Because we have seen a lot of great ideas that when it goes into being operationalized, it just doesn't work once it hits the ground. And so thank you so much for being there. So we are going to just open up for a couple of free questions here on the panel, but then we're going to have 15 minutes for solid Q&A. So I want you to start getting your questions ready there in the audience, but also virtually. One of the things I want to kind of push on to Assistant Secretary, and this is going to open up for a conversation for the panel, is you're talking about going to school in the 70s and what you were able to do. In the spirit of vulnerability, I went to college in the 90s, very low income, but I benefited from everything from Section 8 to free and reduced lunch to Pell Grants to Perkins loans to arts and schools. I played the saxophone for 7 years. We were deeply transient, moved around all the time. And I want you to know that even someone who went to college in the 90s, that journey is impossible today. We have to demystify the erosion of the safety net. This whole idea that I'm a proof point. Perkins doesn't even exist anymore. Pell Grants have been eroded. Cost of tuition has risen exponentially. Free and reduced lunch. We have kids who are walking up to get their lunch and being told they have debt on their account and not being able to eat. We have arts in schools. Yeah, you can play an instrument if you can afford to rent one. And so, literally, in just this short generation, we have to understand and remember that we have really eroded that fragile safety net that we had even just, I'm 20 and a savant. No, um, uh, not too long ago. And so I do want to just bring home when we talk about things around determination and motivation and some of these things, the world, our communities, our policies aren't written in a way for people, especially student parents, to be able to bet on themselves and bet on their children. It's a lot of times it's not about motivation, it's around being seen. We don't even offer diapers in this country. Sit with that. And so I don't want to just give voice to the mythical. I do want us to talk about some of the practical things that we've seen around student parents strategies that are happening on college campuses. And so what I would love for each of you to just share just one concrete, innovative idea, strategy that you are seeing folks do that enable student parents to matriculate, persist, and graduate. And it would be great if it doesn't cost $1 million. And it's great if it's around shifting mindsets. And if it does cost $1 million, that's okay too, because we have some money bags in the room, right? Yeah. But I do just really let's truth tell and share an innovative, concrete strategy that you're seeing around student parent and post-secondary.
So I'm going to jump in. We're working on, and at my last institution, we did this as well, but family-friendly classrooms. So y'all know when you go on social media and you do the endless scroll, whether you do it in the morning or at night, and you're just looking to see what's hot and what's cool, you see that teacher that's holding the kid in the classroom, and they're all on the board, and they're like, oh my God, they're a saint, they're a hero. In my mind, I'm thinking, so why is it that parent, the professor has to hold the baby in the classroom? So what are the deficiencies in the environment that's making that possible? But on the other end, I think it's a wonderful thing that you have faculty that are really interested in supporting their students that way. So at my previous institution, and we're starting to look at it at Howard, we are looking at designating when students go into their schedules, they can see whether or not it's an online class or if it's free textbooks or something like that. So I'm gonna pick this class because it's gonna give me this. But maybe we can have classrooms that are family friendly. So if you need to bring your kid, if it's a safe environment, we're looking to outfit certain physical spaces to where the kids can go and there's a book over here or there's something over there that keeps them engaged while mom or dad or whomever is sitting in the classroom learning from the instructor. But that also means that you have to change your curriculum up a bit, where you're not just standing at the front of the room lecturing all day, but you have a space where you don't necessarily have to be quiet, but there's more collaborative. It's a collaborative approach to the educational environment. So we're toying with that idea. It's one that we hope to pilot really soon, but it's one where I have to say that my faculty are really excited about. And in certain spaces, not all of them. Okay, so don't go out and say that all my, faculty said we're going to do this, because then I'm gonna get a no confidence vote or something like that. But that's fine. But
Come from.
yeah, we'll take it and I'll frame it. But it's a matter of, I've seen so many students and even myself where I didn't feel like I could bring my kid in the classroom. So remember I said earlier, I had this lady, Mrs. Green, who I talked about in our 1 in 5 podcast, where she would be in the grad studies and research office. I went to school at Florida State and I got my degrees from FAMU, but I went to Florida State as well. And at that time, there was nobody at FSU that I could drop my kid off to. So I would go across the train tracks, go to Mrs. Green, take Lyric, who's now 18. Y'all pray for me. She's 18. Take her to Mrs. Green's office, and then I'd go to class, walk back across the train tracks, and I'd go to class. But what if I had a space where I could do that on campus in my classroom? She was old enough to sit in the class and not, disturb anything. So we're looking at those types of designations for those students.
Love it. Love it. I would, and challenge us to think about what that might look like in our own workspaces too. So let's sit with that too, in a creative way. Who wants to go next? Okay.
So I actually love that because I brought my daughter to several of my classes and thankful I had that support. But I know that's not across our campus or any kind of policy. It should be. But I think my big thing would be the budget reevaluations or the funding for student parents. So I had all of my husband's debt is basically living expenses. And he got so much debt from it. So I was terrified when I started college of like, I don't want that debt. I don't want that to follow me. Like, how are we going to pay yours off? We're low income and like we can't add two. And when I first started, that's where my debt came from. It was living expenses. And little did I know, like my university can do budget reevaluations, and it's not publicly known. It's not out there. There's, I found it like it was just given
Could
advice.
you break down what a budget reevaluation is? Just
Yeah.
really, just
So-
high level.
So you can get a budget reevaluation. Basically, how it was explained to me as a student was when you start at the University of Michigan, you are put on a very, very, very traditional budget. So when you're a freshman, you are a super traditional freshman budget. Sophomore, junior, senior. So it does not account for my expenses as a student parent. It accounts for the traditional 18-year-old coming to college. Probably
Majority
has,
owning the noun.
Yeah, so it is for the very most traditional student in existence of college.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly. And so it's like, well, that ain't realistic. But you can get budget reevaluations. They just don't tell you. And it came to the point of like, I can't make it on this. Like, how do you live on this? And why don't you get a budget reevaluation? Well, what the heck is that? And when I did it, boom, my aid opens up. I get more funding. I can apply for scholarships because I was on the Go Blue guarantee. So I was full financial aid for my schooling. That doesn't account for housing and stuff like that. And if you get the full financial aid, you can't get scholarships. You can't get any other aid. You can't get emergency aid even. You have to have wiggle room in your budget. And so you go through the evaluations, and we have family housing, and I lived in family housing. So you submit your expenses for family housing and the cost. They don't account for cars or anything, which is crazy because when you're a parent with a child with health issues, you need a car to go to the hospital. But at the very least, they count for food, like phone bills, things like that. And it was able to open up all this other aid. And after that, I did not incur a penny of debt after the budget reevaluation. The other thing they don't tell you, though, is you have to do it. So the first one counts for the fall and winter. Then you have to redo it for spring and summer, and then redo it for the next fall and winter. So it's like once you get on that track, then you're better. You have better chances of surviving. But then it's also like it's not across the board. They don't necessarily give it to everyone or accept everyone's documentation or things. Like they need to normalize what it is they're looking for or what they're doing, and they need to just announce it of like you can get this so families can survive. Because without the funding, you're paying off debt for the rest of your life, and that's not fair because it's not even for schooling. It's just to live.
Yeah, and don't even get me on fair. It's just around reframing the noun. So we've heard two things. We're going to hear from the assistant secretary, and then we're going to move to audience questions. I just want to recap. We heard about creating spaces where student parents can bring all of their identities into the classroom in a really thoughtful, strategic way around creating more family classroom spaces. And it's just not a structural thing. It's also around shifting mindsets and looking at the curriculum, looking at what is being taught, how it's being taught. And so it's important that we heard the technical and the adaptive aspects of that. And then we also heard about budget reevaluations. And this is something that we can immediately go back and do for student parents we're working with, and making sure that there's an understanding that this is a lever they can pull. But we also heard the porous hole there. It's something you have to do every semester, every quarter, that actually plays into that. And so two really concrete ideas that aid in stronger environments for student parents. And the assistant secretary, what are you going to share?
Well, there are a number of these type of work that is happening in different institutions in isolations. One of them, maybe just give an example, is that some institutions have academic advising, which we all knew what it was and still is, what course to take and what to do with this. The other one, they're adding coaches, student coaches. These are advisors, but they don't sit there and talk to you about your physics class. They ask you a question, what's happening? As a chancellor, I used to get a report from them on Mondays or Tuesdays as to when they interviewed these students that needed that support. What happened? Life happened. Some of these parents, they're also not only taking care of their kids, they're taking care of their parents as well. So those are some of the issues. I think the issue is this. We need to scale up these activities at different institutions. And to scale up something, you need scaffolding. You need know-how. You need sharing things. So administration believes in sharing best practices. So on May 1, Department of Education is bringing 33 institutions together here in Washington to talk about best practices to reducing the graduation gap, equity gap. How do you reduce that? What are the best practices? This is how we are going to share that with other institutions. Many of the stories that we shared here are going to come up, and we will share it with other institutions. So there are a lot of good things that are happening, but we need to share it with others. We need to scale it up. We need to put more people in these types of programs.
I love that. And it's ultimately, you're talking about building learning communities, which is ultimately what the past 2 days or the 2 days are about. And so let's take some questions from the audience. Yes, Ms. Judge Terrell, I have to wait till you get your mic, and then we'll.
I think that this is all very interesting, but uh, no, because you got to deal with, you're talking about meeting people where they are. The average student is not going to feel comfortable taking on the university to do these things, or even on their jobs. I went to law school and I brought my kids to class because I was working full time. But people don't do that. Every job I've ever had, I took my kids. I told them, the people, they're coming. But you got to have that state of mind. So how do we prepare the young people to take on an institution?
Well, that's right up there to the meaning of life. But I had the pleasure of sitting next to Ms. Judge Terrell yesterday. Incredible story. If you get a chance to spend some time with her, was elected under the Clinton administration. I am going to answer that because I think it's an adaptive question and that we can kind of move on. And I think what Judge Terrell is lifting up in this space is that moving our student parents from a space of gratitude to agency. They need, and we want them to celebrate the resources, the tools, the opportunities, but they also need to understand that that opportunity was their birthright. And we want them to understand that they're uniquely positioned to reimagine for themselves, for their families, but also for their community. And if I can be so bold to say our country, to do is what Jess says. And so moving from gratitude to agency, I think is a huge part of that.
We have a virtual question from a Dr. Nielsen who asks, how does an institution balance policy and procedures with minors on campus, with liability and acceptance from faculty in the classroom?
I'm going to take that one. Because I get that one all the time. But I think it's a great question. And liability is important. So we have to think about that. You know, you don't want the kids slipping and falling, all that kind of stuff. However, many of the policies that we put in place as institutions, we do it ourselves. And so I've had people throw a policy at me and say, but it's in policy, or it's in board policy, or it's in college policy. And then I say, well, who wrote that policy? And then everybody gets quiet. And I go, well, again, who wrote that policy? Was it the policy? You know how they say like the college, that mystic being that's up there somewhere? No, it was the leadership sitting in this room. So when you think about, you know, having minors or kids on campus, and I'll say this in two frames. On the one end, we're talking about the steep decline in enrollment for colleges across the nation. But we don't open up our doors to kids or students until they get to high school after they've already made the decision of either I'm going to college or not. When we need to be looking at these kids when they're babies, when they're starting in, that's why you need these child care centers on campus. That's why you need to get into the elementary, middle, and high schools so that you can start pulling them in early. Because what I do with kids is I say, I don't care if you come to my college, I just want you to go to somebody's college. That doesn't mean you have to get a 4-year degree, but you just need to come to college. But then you take that and say, all right, when we get the kids here, I'm not saying put them in a lab space, in a bio class where they're dissecting eyeballs and stuff like that. You know, it has to be in the appropriate, you know, spaces. I'm not going to put them in a welding classroom where they can, I'm not going in a welding space unless I have a helmet and the jacket and all of that on. So you have to use a common sense approach when you look at it, but you have to also think outside of the box because liability is liability. And you have it for a reason. You pay millions of dollars each year to make sure that you're okay. Because trust me, if a student is going to slip and fall, so is the 2-year-old that's going to slip and fall. But I can guarantee you, when I look at the data on the emergency situations that happens on my college campus, more than likely it's us, the adults, that slip, fall, bump into walls, whatever the case is. It's more us than it is the kids. So open up the institution, do it in a common sense way where, I mean, again, you're just like everybody has car insurance, you have it for a reason. And if something happens, it happens, but that's life, right? But if you don't open up the institution, then we're going to keep seeing these steep enrollment declines and all these other issues because we're not allowing the kids to come to campus and to see what this world is all about soon enough rather than later.
I think too, families visit campus even without being a student. I've seen kids on campus that are not necessarily the students. So what's the difference? Like if I bring my kid on campus as a student versus you bringing your kid on campus just to visit, just to use the library because it's a local library, you know, there's no difference. Like kids are coming on campus regardless if you're a student or not. And I think too, we can trust the parents to hold some accountability for their own family members. I mean, that's what we've tried to do is like, you know, yeah, like when we opened our library space, it's like, well, can't they be, you know, like, can't we acknowledge the fact that they're probably gonna
Trust
pick up
them on
after
the
their
train
kids?
with their kids.
Yeah,
We
like,
trust them,
Did you
yeah.
hear
they're
that?
they're gonna
Right?
watch them. Like, we're not
I
up and
heard
walking
that
away
they're
from
going to
them.
keep the kid in the. What if they leave the kid? How many of you know that happens?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Like, I'm not up
Seriously.
and leaving my kid. Like, she would freak out for one. But like, you know, we can trust the parent, and kids are gonna be on our campus no matter what. So like, why not normalize it?
Mhm. It's really interesting how conversations of trust come into play when you're talking about certain income levels. I think Nicole here had a question.
Hi, Nicole Westrick from Morgan State University. I run our degree completion programs for adult learners. And this is really a policy question that builds on what President Willis said, but how are we addressing the fact that some students, 39 million, have some college and no degree, but have maxed out their Pell eligibility, and their only path forward is student loans without any federal support, but they're still living in poverty, and there's only so much that individual institutions can do. What is the federal policy on that going to change?
Well, I think you used the word federal.
Meaning of life.
We carry out at the Department of Education the statute and the authority given to us by the Congress. The Pell Grant that the president is working very hard to double it. If it was up to the president or the department, it would have been doubled today. But we need to make sure that we work with Congress. That's all of us can then work and educate the importance of Pell Grant. So Pell Grant, we are working in that area. But as I said just about a few minutes ago, tuition has gone up. Your institution and others have as well. Pell Grant has stayed here. So we need to find more funding, but we need the authority. We need to have funding. We need to have the authority from the Congress to be able to increase Pell Grant for people to support them.
I also think that's an institutional challenge. And I'm going to say this as a former faculty member. So I started off teaching history. And I remember once when I was a provost in Syracuse, New York, we had this class that popped up on the schedule that was the history of witchcraft. And I said, so I'm in a 2-year institution. Why are we teaching the history of witchcraft? So I'm going to leave that there. How many of y'all need the history of witchcraft today? And I'm using that as an example because I've seen a lot of students max out in their aid because they are taking courses that have nothing to do with where they need to go. Our degrees are this hodgepodge of making sure that our faculty have jobs. And I know I'm shuddering as I say this, I'm shivering a little bit, but it's the truth.
Beep, beep.
We are rivers, but it's the truth because there are 1,500 people online. How many of your degree plans, when you look at them and you look at the courses, do they make sense for the world that we are entering, that we are at, that we are heading towards? So instead of allowing our students to take on debt with these courses, not being able to transfer from 2-year to 4-year, or taking classes like the history of witchcraft or whatever else that doesn't make sense when they get into these spaces or when they get into the world, then that's when they max out. So we have to do the hard conversations with folks to help figure out, okay, yeah, you need to keep your job. I understand that. But how do we make sure that the students that we produce are relevant to the workforce that we need so that they don't have those types of issues?
Could I just add to the previous comments? I thought your question was the level of the Pell Grant. I got it. So first of all, you mentioned you were a history faculty. Faculty have their own dynamics at each institution, and that's something that we need to work with, or institutions need to work with. I believe that you can change the course of history much easier than changing a history course in a university. I'll give you a chance. It took some time for do that, but this is something that institutions can do. This transfer problem that exists. There are system universities that you go from one of the campus of that to the other, and they don't accept credit hours. That's a loss. This is where the advising needs to come in. This is where institutions need to come in. This is where states need to come in to make sure that the students are not asked to take courses that are not. There are people who go from one program to another, and then they have to redo so many other classes. Of course, they max out. But even if they don't, even 120 credits that they take is exactly what they need. Pell Grant is not going to be able to be sufficient for that tuition. And that's where the amount needs to come.
All right.
So the question becomes, do they need 120 credits?
That's a
Like,
different question.
I know,
We
I'm not,
could
I'm not
answer
posing
that.
that to you. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, when we talk about reshaping the state of higher education, who said that it has to be 120 credits? Who said that we have to take, 3 classes and 50 minutes each? So that's just my, when we talk about innovative thinking, we need to rethink higher education because
Yes.
it's never going to match the system that we're set up in.
I love that I have the hot panel, and we We are heading into this next session. I'm fired up. I want to leave us with two things. First of all, I want to thank Assistant Secretary Jess and Dr. Willis. Please give it up. But I want to highlight two things that that bubbled up through this conversation. That's very clear. That puts the ownership on folks in the seats as much as the folks here on this panel. And there's two things: public policy and systems change. Public policy, just really quickly, you used to have an old school camera. There was something in the middle. You took the picture. You went and got your film developed. Remember, you used to go and get the film developed, and it captured what you were focusing on, but it also captured the context in which the subject was standing. We have to start to look at the context in which our student parents are standing. It's unfair. It's unequitable. It's unjust not to. Systems change. When you have a heart attack, stick with me. I'm just going to play a little, Grey's Anatomy here. When you have a heart attack, the cardiologist is charged with making sure to stabilize you. They defibrillate, EKG, medicine, whatever it is that they need to do to stabilize you. But pretty quickly, what do they start to do? They start to understand the root cause because they're trying to prevent the next heart attack. Where do you live? What's your diet? What's your exercise? What's your stresses? We have to understand, everybody in this room, that we're in the business of our direct service, our day-to-day realities of what we need to do to stabilize student parents, families, communities. But we also have to understand we're in the business of preventing the next heart attack. To not do both is unequitable, it's unjust. And nobody's going to invite us to the table. Shirley Chisholm, I'm going to end with this. If there's not a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Picture really quickly while I transition. Thank you. Okay. Let this picture be taken really quickly, and then we'll transition. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you to that panel. Thank you, Chastity, Daria, Jessica, and Nasser for the engaging panel, for sharing strategies on how post-secondary systems can evolve to become more accessible and equitable to student parent families. So now we are going to transition into our next session. We'll focus our attention on child welfare and family well-being. We know the importance of investing in children and caregivers during the earliest years, which is why Ascend launched its 2-generation prenatal to 3 learning and action community in 2020. Our next panel will share the group's key findings and explore solutions for reimagining the nation's child welfare system to one that safeguards children and ensures families that they have the resources to thrive. Here by video to introduce our panel of experts is Ju Young Chang, who is a program director for child well-being at the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, who works tirelessly to promote children's healthy development and protect them from abuse and neglect. After Ju's remarks, Ascend Fellow and Aspen board member Katie Albright will moderate a conversation with our panel of experts. Thank you.